Hello and welcome my partners in crime, and thank you for joining me again today. As you can see, I'm back in my other part of where I have to do this because my office is being packed away and moved around and all different stuff being done in it. As the UK opens up, so do we, I suppose, don't we? So this is where you'll see a few changes just to do with the background for now, and I don't know what it's going to look like in the end, but for now this is going to be where I'm going to film. A bit more comfortable, I think, to tell you the truth. Okay, before I start on this case, I know you have a warning with the intro and everything. It tells you, you know, there's graphic content and all this in it. This case is a case of a murder of a 7-year-old child. So, you know, I'm quite graphic. I'm not holding anything back. Because I don't believe that's what we should be doing. So if this case is not for you, you don't like anything to do with murders of children, then I suggest that, you know, you watch another one of my videos and stuff that hasn't got that in it. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a warning before we start that there is content in this video that will be upsetting to some viewers. Okay, so enough about that. Before we start, you know what to do. Put your thumbs up. You know, subscribe, hit the like button, which this thumbs up is. You can hit the bell button, and you can also follow us on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can hear this case at some point on Spotify once I have time to do it. So now we've done all the housework parts of it, let's get on with this case. So the case today is a harrowing, really, and it's a terrible, terrible murder of a young 7-year-old child. Now, this murder took place actually on the 8th of October 1992, and this is in Sunderland case in the UK, Tyne and Wear actually in Sunderland, and it's unsolved. So that means that out there somewhere there is a child murderer. So as we go through, I think the thing is with this case, it's unsolved, but it's had a lot of stuff in it. You've had people arrested, people got off, you know, acquitted, other people questioned, no, you know, but no one, I think since 1994, has actually been charged with this murder. So I think the best thing to do is let me just take you through a bit of a timeline of this case before we really go into it. So on the 8th of October 1992, Nikki Allan's body was discovered really in blood-stained. It was just terrible in this derelict building, and literally you could see where she lived from there, and she was found in the basement of this burnt out building, but we'll go into that in a bit more. Now, Nikki's body had to be identified by her grandfather, and her grandfather was Dickie Prest, and it must have been harrowing for him. So what the police have said that happened to Nikki is that once she was stabbed 37 times, but she was actually killed, they believe, before that by a house brick, and where her skull actually was smashed in with that. So there was no evidence of sexual assault on this child at all, but this death was terrible. It was horrific. On the 11th of October 1992, a man had already been sort of questioned, and he was released then without charge at that point. On the 12th of October 1992, an artist's impression of the man seen in the area with the girl at the time of Nikki's disappearance was also issued, and on the 13th of October 1992, police issued the composite of the clothing and stuff that Nikki was wearing at the time of her disappearance, really, and abduction and murder. And I think the reconstruction was staged as well, so this is to jog everyone's memory. So this was done very, very, very quickly. So from the 8th till the 13th, really, things were done very, very quickly here to try and get some information, get the case out there. This was a very close-knit community. So on the 18th of October 1992, neighbour George Heron was charged with her murder. So on October 19th, 1992, there was a large police presence which needed to be outside Sunderland's Magistrates Court. And this is when George Heron actually first appeared in the dock for the first time under these murder charges. November the 21st, 1993, the murder case against Heron collapsed, and the judge at Leeds Crown Court, because I think it had to be moved from Sunderland because of people want to kill this man. You know, you had a child murderer, or so they thought, and they moved it to Leeds, and I don't think it was far enough, to tell you the truth, because it didn't stop them. There was a lot of vigilante, but we'll go into that in a little bit longer. But on the 23rd of November 1993, this man now, this really, it was acquitted, because really the case against him, and we've spoken about this case, and I'll go into more detail about this, about police powers, you know, pace. And I think this case highlights really why we have to stick to pace rules to either keep a prisoner, that's someone that is, you know, charged with murder and not being able to release him out on the street, or to make sure that an innocent man isn't being persecuted for a crime that he didn't do. So we'll go into that in a little bit as well. So listen, it was about a 7.5 hour trial, and he was found not guilty, and he had stated that he would never be able to return to the North East, and I think he ended up somewhere else in England, you know, or Wales or Ireland, somewhere like that. He couldn't have, it would have been unsafe for him. So the trial had lasted 6 weeks, and he had spent, George had spent about 13 months in custody anyway, waiting to go to this trial on this murder charge, where he was subsequently, you know, really acquitted for, and I'll go into that in a little bit longer. So in 1994, Sharon Henderson, this is Nikki's mum, brings a civil suit against George Heron and charging him really because he'd got away with it in the criminal court. So she wanted, I think it was the grandfather actually as well, Dickie, that actually funded this civil case against him. And I think the charging him with battery of a child, and it was resulting in her death. Now, I'll go into the differences also after between the difference of a criminal court and a civil court. And I suppose the best known case you'd know for that is the O.J. Simpson case, really. That he'd got away with murder, hadn't he? And then the family then took him to civil court, where he was found liable, not guilty, liable for that murder. So we'll go into a little bit of that, but that was in 1994. So really, that was the last time in this case that anyone was even convicted of anything to do with this murder. But it didn't last long, did it? He was trialled in 1993, and he was out really 1994. That was it. The civil suit then took effect, and we'll go into that in a little while longer. In September 2013, Crime Watch reconstructed and put this case firmly back into the public eye, and it needs to be in the public eye. Even now, you know, when we think this is 2013 and there is other things that's coming up, but is it really in the public eye as much as it should be? We have a 7-year-old child terribly murdered. You know, it just graceful, really, that no one has been caught for this murder up until now. But so, you know, Crime Watch is a great program in the UK, and it done a great reconstruction, and this program did produce quite a lot of leads, actually. Give it that, it did. But unfortunately, no arrests. So in February 2014, Northumberland police, they arrested Sunderland serial killer, and his name is Stephen Grieverson, and he was arrested on suspicion of Nikki's murder. Now, he was questioned and bound, and Nikki's mum, you know, she writes to him and asked him really to cooperate with the inquiries and this, that and the other. But the detectives later say, you know, that he hasn't got anything to do with it, and so he was bound, and that was it. He was, you know, and there was no further action taken against Stephen. But we'll have a look why they believe that Stephen may have had something to do with it, and I'd like to know your opinion on whether you think he still might have had. You know, you never know. You never know, because this man is a serial killer. I think he's named like the Sunderland Strangler. So by August 2015, really there wasn't much going on, was there? You'd had a man arrested very shortly after the murder. You'd had him acquitted. You'd had a serial killer questioned. You know, this is hope for this mother. This is hope for this family, that something's going to, you know, this child is going to get justice. No, and then nothing happens with him. He's released without charge. Then 2016, sort of different things were coming out. You know, we've got DNA now. You know, the advances in DNA even in 2016 were a lot better. You know, amazing to what they were in 1992, 1993 time. So there was lots of things going on. But she did in 2016 release, or she launched really this online petition urging the Northumberland police to carry out really much more thorough investigation. I think she wanted a review of this case, because you're talking about policing in 1992-93 time. It's not the same as it is today. It's not the same as from 2015, 2016 to what it is today. So she was right, and I think 500 people signed that petition to really sort of get behind her. But the thing is, if there's no evidence at that point, or they didn't know there was any evidence at that point, it's difficult, isn't it, to reopen a case when there isn't anything. But then they found, I think, 2018, they found DNA. So it's 2017. The Northumberland police had this dedicated new forensic team, and they said that they had found DNA, an unknown male's DNA on Nikki's body. So, you know, and I always say to you, when someone's stabbed, you know, 37 times, bashed over the brick, there's evidence there. But in 1992, 1993, it would have been very difficult to get that evidence. So if they'd stored all this stuff correctly, you know, and sealed, and as we've said before, we've lost a lot of cases where people haven't stored evidence and stuff properly. So when it comes to where we have these advances in DNA, we have to have evidence kept so well that you can use it to find a killer. Listen, we've gone through the timeline, and now I'm going to go into the details of this murder and the suspects and everything about this murder. But I first wanted to give you that outline so you can see this is the longevity of this case. This child's murder was nearly 30 years ago. We're now in 2021, and no one yet has been brought to justice, really, for the murder of this child. So this is the case of Nikki Allan, the 7-year-old child, brutally murdered in 1992. So in 1992, in October 1992, the night of this happening, you had Nikki and her mum and her siblings, and we'll go into their ages and stuff in a minute, at the grandfather's house of where she lived. Now, he lived the floor above her. That's where he lived, in this block of flats, and I'll show you about them in a minute. And literally, she was a lovely girl, happy girl, and she said she wanted to go and watch the telly. So there's a few different stories that I've read about this. Some people have wrote and said that Nikki was seen, you know, outside a pub. That's the last time she was seen. Other people have said, like her mum, that she had left her grandparents' house the next floor up from her flat, and Nikki wanted, and this was just before 10 p.m. at night, so Nikki wanted to run off first, you know, and go and watch the telly. So the mum was a few minutes behind her, but she could see her over the balcony on the bed, so she had to go down the stairs and run along the balcony. And I think that's when she was reported, I don't know if it's when she was reported missing, but the mum said that she could see her there. So, but as I said, some stories have said that the girl, that Nikki, had left the grandfather's about 2 hours before, about 8:30 at night. But the mum is saying it was about, I think this is how it reads actually, to show the truth, is that she left just before 10 p.m. at night, and she and her other 3 children were walking slowly behind, a few minutes behind, if that, really saying goodbye, this, that and the other. And Nikki ran down the stairs and has to go, and she could see her over the balcony going down, and that would have been it. When she got home, Sharon, the mother, Nikki wasn't there. That was it. She was gone. And it was a few hours she kept looking for her and all the neighbours. This is a very close-knit community. I don't think Sharon was with her husband at the time, or a partner at the time, but he still had a close relationship with the kids and her. But they had the grandparents living above them. They'd lived in this building for quite a long time, so it was a very good community. People knew each other. They knew everyone. She sounds the alarm that Nikki's gone missing, and everyone now is out looking for this child. So these flats, I think it's Wargraft or Waregraph in Sunderland, and I think I've got a picture of it, but the flats have been pulled down by then because they're quite old. I mean, this is a very old case really when you think about it, isn't it? So, and right opposite them flats, you could see an old sort of warehouse really. And Nikki's clothes were found, I think the next morning, about 10 a.m. Her coat and her shoes, not anything else, she was fully clothed actually, but her coat and her shoes were found outside the building. And then Nikki's body was found in the basement of this really old burnt out warehouse. That's where the murder had happened. But you could literally see her home across from her. Terrible really. Anyway, these neighbours, they'd been searching, they found this body, and I think one of the neighbours was the ones, only the police had been called, everyone was looking, but one of the neighbours did find her body, and it would have been a terrible sight. You're talking about a girl that's been bludgeoned to death really. The police have said they believe that it was a house brick that was used to smash her head in, literally smash her skull in, and her face and stuff. She was brutally attacked. They think that's what killed her. I think the autopsy said that. They believe that's what killed her. And then she was stabbed 37 times. Now, the child was tiny, absolutely tiny. This is a frenzied attack, really frenzied. Now, the problem is we don't know if it was sexually motivated. You just don't, really. There was no signs of a sexual assault on her at all, but that doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't a sexually motivated attack on her. We've spoke before, haven't we? Sometimes it's the thrill of the kill is what the perpetrator needs, or sometimes it may be because they were disturbed before they got to that part. But anyway, luckily the mother didn't have to put up with that, as well. But it was terrible, and her body and her, she wouldn't have been left in a very good state. So the mother didn't identify, it was the grandfather, Dickie, that identified the body, and it must have been actually traumatic for that man, absolutely, and for this family. One, to have found out that, not only is your family member missing, but they've been murdered in such a terrible way. So we've had 3 people arrested, haven't we, for the murder. So we've had George Heron. He was 24-year-old at the time of his arrest. Now, he was the neighbour of Sharon, Nikki's mum, and Nikki. He hadn't lived there long. He had only been there a few weeks. His sister lived there and he'd come to live with his sister. So he hadn't been there long. But he would have known her or seen her, even though he said he didn't. He would have. So in 1993, George Heron, 24, stood trial for the murder of the 7-year-old. Nikki, but was later cleared by a jury. Now George was 24. He hadn't lived in this area long. He'd moved in with his sister. I think she had been there longer than him. He'd moved in with his sister. The locals, or so it's been said, that the locals said that he was a bit of a weirdo, he's the local weirdo. But I think the more you watch my cases, what is a murderer then? What is weird? A murderer doesn't, just because someone may seem different to what me and you are, or how we live our life, it doesn't always make them a murderer. And I think this is what people get wrong. A child killer can, look like me or you. They don't have to be the local weirdo. Given that, though, he had spent some time over this derelict building, this derelict warehouse. But we don't really know much. There isn't much about George, actually, to tell you the truth, that you can really say what his character was like. He wasn't there very long. Then he was arrested for this murder, and then he was acquitted of this murder. He was moved away and stuff. So there isn't much about him. His name had been changed and everything else for this man. And I know people are going to go, what? This is he's got off with murder and this, that, and you haven't changed his name. There's reasons why. And, I've said before, haven't I, when you are convicted of a crime such as this, where you have killed a minor in such a totally disgraceful way, and you go to prison, things are going to happen to you in prison. Also, the public were outraged at this. This local community were outraged. And, that's reasonable, isn't it, to be outraged? But as I said, his court had to be changed, actually, from Sunderland Crown Court to Leeds Crown Court because of danger towards him. There was mobs of people, and that distance didn't stop them. From Sunderland to Leeds wasn't far enough away to protect this man. Now, the reason that he was acquitted of this murder is, so shortly after this murder, George actually confessed to killing her. This is what the police said. Now, there was 12 interview tapes taken at the police station. So we've spoke about pace, haven't we, before? And I'll go into more detail about that in a minute. And if you don't follow the rules of pace, what can happen? So George done 12 taped interviews, and the judge had looked at these interview tapes. He had given a confession. They said that a man was covered in blood, and they said they had found, this is what the police are saying, they had found blood spatter on his shoes and stuff like that. Okay, so the evidence, if this was him that killed this, would have been there. So the trial judge had refused to allow 7 out of the 12 taped interviews with George, because he says they were inadmissible because the oppression, he was put under a lot of pressure. We don't know. I haven't heard these tapes. We can't get hold of these tapes. Wouldn't it be lovely if we could? But we can't. Okay, so you can say now police powers and stuff come out in 1984. All right, Police and Criminal Justice Act come out in 1984. So they were quite aware of what they had to do, these police, under these rules. And when you interrogate someone, or interview is the actual word that should be used, there's a process to that. You cannot put words into someone's mouth. You can't threaten, you can't, we don't know what went on. But if 7 out of 12 of these tapes were not admissible in court, and actually the judge had said that, and he had criticised these police officers and the police force actually for their handling of this case, and especially their handling of George. and misrepresenting evidence. So listen, the law is the law. If someone took you off the street and said, because you look a bit weird, that you've murdered someone, and then took you in to the police station and questioned you, I mean, this man's handed himself in. Now this man, and we have a lot of people that do false confessions, because he could have been a bit slow, he could have had learning difficulties, we just don't know. Right, he was 24, he'd moved in with his sister, he's now gone into a police station and admitted murder, or so they say. Then these tapes must have been awful, being interrogated by these police officers. And then they try and take it to court and the judge literally throws it out, all right, because of the way the man was treated, and that they were absolutely really, the evidence wasn't used how it should have been used. If you're going to have evidence, it's got to be the right evidence, because if you're going to convict the wrong man, there's still a killer out there. And this is the problem with this process. That's why it's there. It's there because you don't want to lose a case because of what your actions when you're investigating a crime. It's really important, that point. And we've seen this in Christopher Halliwell's case that I done the other day, where we spoke about pace and we spoke about the interview techniques that they'd done there. It's really important that these interviews are done correctly and that the evidence is collected correctly, evidenced, properly done, so that if there's any comeback on it, you've done the process right, and then you don't have, cases like this that are dropped. I think the two cases actually, in this case, these two cases cost around £10 million. 10 million. And really, for what? Because there's still a murderer out there, isn't there? Okay, so the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, PACE for short, and it's a code of practice, right? That the police and the police powers, or the code that regulates the police powers and protects the public's rights. Because you have rights. Because if you're innocent of a crime, you do not want to be told that you're guilty and be forced into making statements by police that should know better. And so it's there to protect. That's what it's there to do. Everyone's rights. Everyone's rights. So that's the code of practice. Now, listen, I always say to people when they're arrested, you could be in there between 9 and 12 hours. And I'm not just talking about murderers, I'm talking about anybody. If you're arrested for something and got mental health or you need something else, you could be in there for 17 hours. Give yourself something to do. Ask for the code of conduct book. Sit there and read it so you know your rights. You have the right to go to the toilet, you have the right for water, you have the right for fresh air, you have the right to be treated with respect, and you have the right to have not people pressure you into saying things that are not true. And that's a really important part of the Criminal Justice Act 1984 of PACE, is to protect your rights, literally. But what it does, if you breach them rules, people can literally get away with murder. So look, PACE codes of practice, they cover stop and search. There's loads of issues with stop and searches, as we all know. Arrest, detention, investigation, identification, and interviewing the detainees that you've got. So interviewing on how long you can keep them, what you can say to them, this sort of thing. Making sure it's taped, making sure you don't have questions that they can't answer, or you're giving them the answer. You have to be really, really careful. Really, really careful. And unfortunately in 1992, this was still going on quite a lot, because a lot of cases I've done in the 90s have come back unsafe, haven't they, really? We've done them on here, haven't we? There's many that's been unsafe, or people have been convicted of a crime that they didn't do, and then the perpetrator, who's still out there, is out there killing other people, and an innocent man sitting in prison. It happens a lot. So listen, this is why he was then, allowed free. because his confession that he made to the police was ruled inadmissible as evidence, and the judge at the trial cleared him of all the charges. That was it. That was it. And I think now he went to I think the grandfather, Nikki's grandfather and mother, took him then to civil court. Now we've seen this before, haven't we? O.J. Simpson, right? He went to criminal court, and in criminal court he was found not guilty by a jury. A little bit different from this case. This case was then squashed really because of other things. But O.J. Simpson's trial was, he was found innocent by 12 jury. It was a jury trial. Can't argue with that. Then the family of Nicole Simpson then took him, didn't they, to a civil court, and they sued him civilly for that. Now, Sharon and the grandfather, and I think the grandfather paid the fee because civil court is not free. They took him to court and they won. So in criminal court, he was found, cleared of all charges. But in civil court, he was found guilty. Well, not guilty, liable. There's a difference, you see, in the wording. The fundamental difference is really between criminal and civil law. Criminal law seeks to punish for the offence. Civil law seeks to achieve a remedy, usually cash or something like that, to put you back in the same position you was in. I don't know how that would happen when it comes down to a child's life, but anyway, such as compensation for an injury, that sort of thing. That's more what civil law deals with. By handing out a punishment or penalty, criminal law aims really to deter offenders from doing it again to other people in society and stop them really from reoffending, right? That's the main thing about criminal law. Criminal law, you're going to go to prison, you're going to have lots of different things, including fines. Civil law, you can't go to prison. So the criminal law look at it is that their ultimate aim really is to maintain the stability of the state and the society. That's what criminal law is about. Now, PACE has to be part of that to make sure that we don't have corrupt police officers that want to blame innocent people for things they didn't do, right? So that's, PACE is under that. So now civil law aims to deal with disputes between individuals and organisations. And a lot of people still can't believe that you can get off in a criminal court but still be found liable in a civil. And the reasons why actually are it's about evidence really. It's about that weight of evidence. That's what it's really about. So the decisions in criminal court will either find you guilty, won't they, or innocent. Guilty or not guilty. That's what they say. That's it. And in a civil court, you are liable or not liable. So the outcome of civil cases where one party is found liable is usually awarding the compensation, where for a criminal case, a guilty verdict means conviction and punishment in the form of a custodial sentence, fine or community service. So that's your general difference. And you need to understand this to see why they've wanted to get some justice, all right, for Nikki. Even that. And the same as Nicole Simpson's America case against O.J. Simpson, they just wanted justice. So yes, a person can face both criminal charges and civil charges at the same time, right, for a crime. And that could be anything really, and the CPS actually will prosecute in a criminal case, and then at the same time the wronged person then can sue then for damages in the civil court. And this is sort of what's happened here. This family allowed the criminal justice system to do its part. They feel that they've been fouled by that. because there's no, it's difficult no matter how much you hear that, someone's been arrested, you want them still to be charged, don't you? You want them to go to prison, you want them to serve justice, serve their time for your murder of your child. They didn't have that. So they wanted something, and that part of it was this civil suit against them. That's against him. That's what they wanted. And really, I think the main difference there is with criminal and civil law is really evidence. It is, I mean, custodial or fine, that's the difference in that. But it's really about the weight. And I always say to people the easiest way to really think about when we're looking at criminal cases and civil cases is really, if you think that a criminal case, you're innocent until proven guilty, aren't you? The threshold for evidence to be met to put you and take away your liberty, because that's what it's about, is much higher in a criminal court. In a civil court, the weight of the evidence, the probability of whether you did it or not is a lot less, because you're only talking about a monetary punishment, aren't you? You're not talking about your liberty taken away, so the threshold is a lot different. And I think, you got I think with a criminal case, you're talking about certainty. Are you certain? Is that jury, without reasonable doubt that this man did it? But in civil law, the probability, 50-50 maybe, that's enough. So certainty versus probability, I think that's the best way to describe it. And listen, in civil court, George was found guilty or liable for her murder, or her death, not murder, because murder is the wrong word in civil court. Unlawful death, really, but not murder. So yes, he was. And he was fined, and you're going to go mad when you hear this, he was fined £7,000. £7,000. And I think up to date, when I've checked, no, he hasn't paid a penny of it, really, at all. Because he believes he's innocent, and he believes everything was falsely done against him. And he could be right, couldn't he? So now let's talk about, in 2014, another then suspect's come along. Now this is Sunderland serial killer, this is Stephen Griverson. Now he was arrested and quizzed over this murder, and he was later told that he would face no further action, that he was literally free to go. Now the reason they looked at him for this murder, because he's a serial killer, but he'd already killed, I think, 3 boys up until then. I mean, Nikki was a 7-year-old girl, totally different MO. On the face of it, when you first look at it, he was totally out of his MO. But then I think he killed 4 teenage boys in a series, and he was committed between 1990 and 1994. Nikki's death was 1992. So again, in this area, he was from Sunderland, where she was from. Serial killers are serial killers. So I think with him, so he was convicted of 3 counts of murder for 3 different boys in Leeds Crown Court. He was handed a life sentence actually on the 28th of February 1996, and he was recommended to serve 35 years. No, not even a whole life term for taking these lives. Really? Anyway, and that's even though before he could be considered by the Home Secretary for a release. But listen, I'm going to talk about other things later on in different cases. So yeah, really he could be out, couldn't he? Really? We've had worse than him being allowed out. But anyway, in October 2013, Grievson then was convicted of the 1990 murder of 14-year-old Simon Martin. He killed Simon. His MO was that where he usually strangled, right? That was his thing. That's why he's known as the Sunderland Strangler. He strangled them, and he usually strangled boys. But he is a serial killer. So serial killers, are not always caught, are they, for the crimes they've done. So he could have been up for this murder. even though Nikki was 7 and she was a girl, it was the way that she was beaten and stabbed. Very similar to this case of Simon Martin. Very close connection. Really. MO's very similar. And that's what I think police thought when they interviewed him. There was no evidence. Of course there wasn't against him, so they had to release him. Anyway, he was up for lots and lots of murders anyway. But it would have been nice, wouldn't it, to have found out whether he was the killer or not at that point. Anyway, he became the Sunderland Strangler, and due to the city that he committed all the crimes in, Sunderland, really. But his really preferred method of killing wasn't beating, wasn't stabbing, it was strangulation. But he did, on occasion, murder very similar to the way that Nikki's body was found. And plus, as I say with all these murderers, and especially this one, he's a serial killer. We only know the ones, don't we, that he's been caught for. He's not going to tell you anything at all. He's just not. There could be many, many more, and the MOs could all be different. We just don't know enough about this killer. But he was released without any charge and let go in any connection with Nikki's death. In 2016, it was reported that a young girl had come forward, and she would have been 12 years old in 1992, and she come forward as a witness, and that she's, after seeing, I think, a sketch on the TV, that she had come forward and said that she had information on who this person was. Anyway, I think the police were looking into that, and a lot of leads actually have come from that. 2017, this new DNA evidence was found, which could identify Nikki's killer. You know, the difference with DNA now is from when it was there. The advances in it are amazing, really amazing, but it takes time. We've had older cases than this solved, and literally, you know, you just never know when it's going to come through, do you? So people should be worried out there. And I think in 2018 a man was arrested, really, in relation to Nikki's murder. Now, I can't name this man, nor would I, because as with everything in this case, there has been no charges laid. I think he's been released without charge, but he remains under investigation. And that would be because of the DNA stuff, and from that they can find other evidence. But DNA is relying on how that evidence was collected, how it was stored, how good it is, really. If you got that right, in 1992, if these police had got that part right, let's hope they had, this case could be solved. If they hadn't got that right, and that evidence in any way has been tainted, then that is inadmissible in court. So I think they're taking their time in this case. This was 2018, and I think again actually in 2020 this person's still under investigation. But you know, patience is a virtue. This case has been nearly 30 years already. So I think this man was also rearrested in 2018. So they're questioning, they're doing things. Do I think that this case could be solved? If the police had done everything right in 1992, when it contains the evidence only I'm talking about, forget about their interviewing skills, and that was quite normal in the 90s, and many cases were left unsafe because of their behaviour in the 90s. But they have got new police officers now coming up through the ranks, and have done really since the early 2000s, and this police force have got a dedicated team of forensic people working on this. And policing has changed. I know it's, you know, it doesn't sound like it has with some of the cases we do, but policing has changed. People are more aware now. These officers now are so good at their investigation skills and detection skills. They will go over and over this case. They will go over that DNA, every part of that clothing, every part of everything that was taken. Because you can't stab, say, someone 37 times and smash someone over the head with a brick without leaving DNA somewhere. So it may take time to find it, but I'm sure in this case, or I'm so hopeful in this case, that they do find the evidence that will solve this case. Now, I think in 2020 it was reported that Nikki's mum Sharon met with a witness, and so she was really hopeful. And I think for any family member like this, and I think the father's come forward and he hasn't said anything in many years because of his, this is traumatic on the families. They've lost a child. They've had to fight. I mean, this woman has had to fight for justice, have this case reopened, keep going, put pressure on to do this DNA, to get this killer off the street, to get justice for a child. It's a fight. And the reason it's a fight is because of the mess up at the beginning, which has now cost 10 million, okay? And then now the DNA, and I've said before, police forces have a budget for each crime they have, and DNA is not cheap to get done, but this police force are putting everything into it. And so I'm so hopeful that it gives Sharon and her family and Nikki's father real hope that something in the future will come, and a positive outcome will come out of this, because this child needs justice. And if it isn't any of the people that we've mentioned, that means that there is a killer out there, a killer that could do that to a child. Isn't it awful, really, to think that this child has been dead nearly 30 years and yet no one has really been charged with anything since 1993. So I believe in the police force in this one. I believe in this. I think this team are working really hard. They are going through everything. They're working really hard. And that's my wish for them, that they find justice for Nikki. So anyway, this has been the Nikki Allan case. 7-year-old, taken way too young. She's left 3 sisters behind, her mother, a father, people that loved her, a community that cared, very close-knit community. And these people still fight for Nikki till this day. So you know what to do. If you want to have a look, I think they've got a Facebook page, and it's all about getting justice for Nikki. You can have a look on much of the social media. There's quite a lot about this case. This case is a sad case for me because I don't like unsolved crimes at all. I've said this before. I'd rather have a crime that the perpetrator has been caught, but it must only ever be the true perpetrator that's caught, not someone that the police think did it. Thinking it is not enough. It's just not enough. You have to prove it. And I think this case shows it all. So, you know what to do. Thumbs up if you found this case interesting. You can hit the subscribe button. You can hit that bell button to get notifications. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook. And this case will be on Spotify soon. So thank you for joining me. And until the next time. Bye-bye.